joining us from Good morning, everyone joining us from Scotland, and good afternoon to those joining us from Malawi. My name is Nasim. I am the Communications and Engagement Officer at Scotland Malawi Partnership, and you're all equally welcome to this forum where GiveDirectly is going to give us some updates about the projects that they're doing in Malawi. Just a few housekeeping before we start the meeting and before I hand over to Tom, who is the programs manager for GiveDirectly. If you can all remain muted throughout the meeting so that you can only unmute when you're asked to speak. And that time you can unmute your mic and also just turn on your video so that we can see you if possible. That would be great. And we have the chat box where you can introduce yourself. If you're free and comfortable to do that, just introduce yourself and you can leave your email address as well so we know who you are and where you are from, joining us from. Another thing as well, this whole meeting is being recorded and everything that has been recorded and has been shared here will be shared on our social media networks and including our website and YouTube as well. So if you're remaining in this meeting on this forum, it means you've given us consent to share your details, to share everything that you're going to share in this forum. With these few things, I will hand over Tom to proceed with the update. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Nasim. Hi, everybody. My name's Tom, and I'm a partnerships manager at GiveDirectly. My role basically involves supporting our team in Malawi, who you'll be hearing a lot more about today, as well as our team in DRC with all their partnerships. So whether it's with governments, foundations, other NGOs, anything that involves a partnership on our work. I joined GiveDirectly in November, and I'll also be joined by Yvonne. Yvonne is unfortunately having some internet issues. She is based in Malawi in Lilongwe. She's our programs director. When she does join, she sat in her garden and she has a great background. But hopefully she's going to be joining in a minute or two. I'll get started without her, explaining GiveDirectly's work more generally and our model. And then hopefully Yvonne will be able to join for the second half of the presentation to talk about our work specifically in Malawi and more of a deep dive on our impact in Malawi. And then we'll have time for Q&A. Really would welcome all questions, any questions. And also if we need to go, I'll leave my email address to answer any additional questions you've got if we don't get time in the Q&A. Okay, I'm going to get started. So, GiveDirectly, we have an ambitious vision to end extreme poverty in our lifetime. We do that through giving cash directly to people living in poverty. We do this for a few reasons, but mainly it's for a purpose-driven reason that we believe that people living in poverty have the dignity and also the knowledge to choose for themselves how best to improve their lives. And we believe that giving unconditional cash to people is the best way for them to sustainably decide what to do with it. And it's also the most impactful way of getting people out of poverty. We've reached 1.6 million people globally and delivered $900 million directly to their pockets. We've worked in 15 countries around the world, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa. But we also have large-scale programming in the US. And we're really a research-driven organization. We pretty firmly believe that cash is the best intervention in most cases. But we've, could just believe that and tell people that, but that's not enough. Research and vigor and third-party evaluation is a really key part of what we do to make sure that we're delivering as big an impact as possible over as long a time period as possible. So we often work either with research organizations, universities, on evaluations of our work, but also control trials, and more kind of scientific aspects as well, just to ensure that we're really understanding the impact of our work and cash more generally, and really applying a vigor to our work, which hopefully we can talk about in more detail during this presentation. We currently work in 11 countries. So as I said, mainly in sub-Saharan Africa, but we also work in Bangladesh and the US. And we work with a range of partners. So we work with institutions, whether it's the US government, the UK government, the UN, the World Bank, the EU. Governments like the Scottish government will highlight that partnership later on in this presentation. The Irish government. We also work with foundations and corporates as well. And we're really clear with how we work with partners. We always want to deliver cash directly to people living in poverty with the goal of ending poverty. So this is something that I've already touched upon, but just to flesh out a little bit more, there are over 300 research papers about the effectiveness of cash in reducing multi-dimensional poverty and improving people's lives. And one of the best things about cash is that it isn't a siloed intervention. Very commonly, governments, NGOs, they want to work in a siloed way. They have a food security program, so they deliver food. And food might be the best intervention short term for increasing people's food security, but they're only solving that issue and probably only for a short amount of time. Cash can solve multiple issues at once. It's flexible, it's scalable, but it's also probably more sustainable. People, if they're having food security issues, they don't just want food, they want to improve their livelihoods, increase their income, and then in turn, they can increase their own food security. So we can share papers and information about any of these topics that I've got on screen here. But we've got pretty good, strong evidence that cash increases school enrollment and retention, food security, gender equity. We're actually having a gender analysis happening at GiveDirectly at the moment. And we're finding that cash is a really good women's economic empowerment intervention, and something that actually we probably don't talk about enough. It increases consumption, assets and income, and business ownership. And we found that cash decreases child mortality, domestic violence, the skipping of meals, illness and depression, and alcohol and drug consumption. Often we're asked by individuals, foundations, institutions, well, if you're giving cash unconditionally, how do you know that people won't spend it on bad things? And we found time and time again that if people are given the independence and the dignity to spend money how they want to, they'll spend it on ways that improve their lives in almost every case. Okay, so I've explained a bit about why cash, and now I'm going to talk a bit about how we do it. So we have 4 main ways that we deliver cash. The first way, and our preferred way where we can do it, is one large lump sum transfer, which is typically around $1,000 per household or 500 US dollars per adult. It slightly varies case by case, but we're always basically in that range between roughly $800 and $1,200. And the idea is that we'll target specific areas. So it could be a village, it could be a sub-district, a group of people in the same setting. We'll deliver cash to them essentially all at once, which is what we call a saturation model. And the idea is that not only will those individual households benefit from having a flexible amount of money that means they don't just need to meet their immediate needs, but they can meet their longer term needs, but also that cash has spillover effects in the wider community. We typically find that for every dollar that we give to a household, that roughly $2.50 is made in spillover effects. So how that cash moves around the community can be spent on, say, if you're building a house, then you will work with your neighbor who sells housing supplies, and that extra finance in the local economy has wider spillover effects. And yeah, we find it has around a 2.5 time benefit. So that large transfer model is our absolute key way of working, and Yvonne is going to talk about that in more detail and how that works in Malawi. Malawi is our best example of that model in action, which is great. But we have a few other methods as well. We do a thing called flow payments, which is essentially monthly transfers, which are a smaller amount, maybe $30 or $50 a month, sustained over a long period. Sometimes it's 3 or 6 months in humanitarian settings. Often it's a year, but in some settings, we're doing it for up to 12 years. And the idea of those flow payments is really giving people a sustained income that they can rely upon. And it's particularly helpful where households are maybe just below the poverty line, just to tip them over. And sometimes that's all they need to then reap the wider benefits of cash, which I've already spoken about. We also use cash in emergency settings. So this is a topic that is very important to me. As I mentioned at the start, I don't just focus on Malawi, I also focus on DRC. And DRC at the moment is absolutely an emergency setting with conflict, particularly in the east of the country. And cash is really a superb response in emergencies because it's quick, it's targeted, and it's scalable. You can reach people at a large scale without needing a big staff, without needing access, shipping, all those complications in humanitarian settings. We can send cash directly to people via mobile phone, sometimes in minutes, which is a very useful model in humanitarian settings. And we find that it's particularly helpful where more typical humanitarian response, healthcare, wash, nutrition, those kinds of interventions are not reaching people yet. Cash can often bridge the gap in the first 100 days after an emergency, so people can meet their immediate needs until that more kind of formal humanitarian response can then reach them. Lastly, we have this thing called Cash Plus, and I really want to emphasize that GiveDirectly's business model is cash. We just do cash. But sometimes there's ways that cash can complement and layer with other interventions, which we find has more impact than just the cash intervention alone. So we work with the climate actors, education actors, health actors. We work with MSF, for example, in Malawi to support cervical cancer patients, and agriculture organizations. And we find that sometimes if you still provide unconditional cash, but you provide support so people can access these services, the cash can be even more impactful. GiveDirectly's model is digital from end to end, and we provide all this kind of expertise and tech in-house, which is a real asset. We have a really incredible tech team. I'll be honest, I don't fully understand what some of them do. Really incredible team of coders and programmers. But the idea is that tech helps us from end to end. So firstly, finding people to target. We use machine learning, we use government databases, we use geo-targeting, so basically satellite imagery, to find people who are most in need of support with an enroll people using mobile phones. In some areas where people don't have mobile phones, we do phone drops, but in most of the settings we work in, mobile phone penetration is pretty high. So most people do have a mobile phone. We use the phone to enroll them via typically a short survey, but sometimes it's text messages as well. And sometimes we also do complementary in-person activities to help with that process. We then use the phone to transfer the money via mobile money providers. I'm sure most of you will use mobile money in your day-to-day life, and it's really no different. We send money directly to people's bank accounts using their mobile phones. And then we also use people's mobile phones for monitoring. So we'll do follow-up surveys with people via their mobile phones. And we also have a hotline and a call center that people can call with any issues that they're facing, any safeguarding issues that they're finding. And we really use tech to help with our data as well to flag areas for improvement in our programs. And we've taken that a step further now. So not only are we using mobile phones end to end in the process, we're trying to find ways that we can use them even earlier to not only enroll people in our programs, but actually just find where the biggest need is in the first place. I want to use 2 examples here of how we're using a thing called mobile aid. First example is actually in Malawi, in cities, often during the lean season, there are food shortages, and cities in Malawi, the social protection system, it struggles to census and identify where people actually live and where people are in need. Whereas in villages, people are in a more fixed location, their community knows them better. It's much easier to go door to door and identify where people live, who's in need. In cities, that's harder. People move around a lot more. They have less of a sense of community. They maybe don't have a fixed household. And so we use mobile phone data to, first of all, identify where people are, and also working with researchers like the University of Berkeley, how people use their phones is a very good indication of their level of poverty. So how they use it during the day, the types of calls and texts that they do, mean that we can pretty much use people's mobile phone usage as a proxy for their level of poverty. We're working on a really interesting project at the moment in Mzuzu, in Malawi, with the University of Berkeley to test this model. But the idea is that hopefully we'll be able to scale out with the University of Berkeley, but also with the Malawi government, to really improve how we can support people during lean season in urban settings. Second example of mobile aid I want to talk about is displacement during conflict. So in the DRC at the moment, a lot of people are being displaced from the east of the country near Goma and spreading west. And right now, humanitarian actors, the government, the UN, struggle to identify, first of all, where those people are going and to support them once they've moved. Now, mobile data, again, is incredibly helpful for this. So in DRC, we're working with the mobile phone operators, and where you're seeing groups of phones pinging one mast, maybe in Goma, and then all of a sudden 1,000 phones move, and then they're pinging another mast in a more rural area. We're using that data to track the movement of people. And we're finding that it's an incredibly quick and accurate way of tracking the movement of people. And we're now identifying those displacement events where 100 people, 1,000 people are moving from place to place quickly, all at once. They're displaced by conflict. We're seeing that data show up in our data set, and we can specifically target those people because we know that they've been displaced by conflict, and we can send them cash transfers where they are to help them settle or to meet their immediate needs in their new setting. So this tech is something that we're testing and scaling in a variety of settings under the umbrella of mobile aid, but hopefully that explanation gives you kind of 2 concrete examples of how this model is useful. Cool. So hopefully now you've got a good idea of why cash, and also a bit about how GiveDirectly delivers cash to people. I'm really hoping at this point that I can pass over to Yvonne. Hopefully she's been able to join the call. Yvonne, are you there?
Hello, everyone. Sorry, can you hear me, Tom?
Yeah, I can hear you, Yvonne.
Great, really wonderful to be here. My sincere apologies. I've had challenges connecting to the call, and we'll probably have to turn off my video so I can use my phone for the meeting. But just to introduce myself, my name is Yvonne Namala-Murindiwa. I'm working as Programs Director for GiveDirectly here in Malawi. So I basically work with the wider field operations team to design and deliver our programs. at the moment, I can't see the slides, but I'll try and go through. And Tom, I think you sort of move things along as we go. Great. Just to give a background to our work here in Malawi, we stations in 2019, $5 million to close to 200,000 recipients in the country across 11 districts and 10 districts and 4 cities. So essentially, we've been collaborating quite closely with various partners, with government, working to deliver on development objectives as outlined in the Malawi Development Strategy, the Malawi 2063. And we've seen a number of improvements or positive outcomes in several indicators, including food security, improving education outcomes, and increasing agricultural outputs. Just to move on to highlighting some of the work that we're doing in country with specific project highlights. What I might term our sort of focal project at the moment is a large lump sum program that we're implementing in Chirazulu district, which is in the southern region of Malawi. There we're aiming to reach about 174,000 individual adults with large lump sum transfers, cash transfers, with the intention of alleviating poverty. We implemented a similar project in another area in the central region of the country, in Tie Kongoni Lilongwe, and there we were able to saturate a sub-district, which in Malawi we call a TA, which was Tie Kongoni in Lilongwe. Essentially, with this project, we're hoping to identify a simple, scalable model that's recipient-centered, and a set of interventions that we hope to take to scale. And we're hoping to use this project as a demonstration project of sorts to show that large lump sum cash transfers can be quite impactful in alleviating poverty, and that it's something that can actually be scaled to a district level and hopefully to the whole of Malawi. We're also looking into how we can measure the impact of our work, and we have a number of assessments that we're doing, including an RCT on the long-term impacts of the cash transfer program, but also looking to identify if there are agile mechanisms that we can use to report on the impact that we're seeing as we go along. On this program, we're working with one particular sort of major donor, that is Canva, who are an Australian-based tech firm, but we're also hoping to bring in other actors as we sort of demonstrate the impact of this work. We're hoping to bring in more actors that can work with us on this particular model. I'm not sure I mentioned this, but we are in this particular program delivering $550 per individual adult living in poverty. And with this program, we implement what we call a saturation model, which basically means we try to identify the poorest areas in a locality or in an area. And then in those areas, we offer everyone the opportunity to participate in our program, thereby reaching everyone in that area with a large lump sum cash transfer, depending on how they opt into the program. Just to give you a glimpse of some of the positive effects or impacts we've been seeing with this particular model, wanted to play a video for you that shows you the impact of this model.
Does giving
to transfers all the way up to a year.
Cash really make a difference. Just watch as this village in Malawi transforms after getting life-changing cash.
Zimenezi zimene kwaniritsa patatha wiki, izi ni zimene ndakwanitsa kupanga patatha mwezi umodzi, izi patatha chaka.
First, let's rewind a bit. Before cash hit the account, life looked very, very different.
Nanga kutsogolo kuniyenda motani chifukwa ngakhale kuti nipite kwakunsenga guleko ndiwo sinimakwanisa kambiri makhaone kuti tilibe china chilichonse.
Masoni mali ntaona so azanga nthemene ntasiya sukulu mali ntaona azangawo zimakhala zinthu zobwereka zedi chilacho ni wawa zedi.
Panthemene ndili wodwala adati thandize mochedwa chifukwa choti sitidakwaniritse zinthuzo.
The thing is, 70% of Malawians live on less than $500 a year, and things have to change. GiveDirectly sent $550, no strings attached, to Malawians like Daniel, Chrissy, and Monica, and they started meeting the immediate needs.
chinthu chimene sindimachiyembekezera kuti ine ndikhoza dzagona pa matalesi komanso mosamvanso ululu pamene kumbuyoku tuloti manisowa
ntandi amalandizaja chinthu choyambira chimene dagula patatha tsiku limodzi ndiye kuti sopo sawosowa siwalepo siyutaniso siyusowa.
But what happened when they've had the money for a week? That's when they take things to the next level.
Dagula mbuzi semodzi nigulako nkhumba zitatu nthawi zambiri monga ngati nthawi zino maseka zinthu zimenezi tikubva bwino chifukwa kuti tosiyanitsa nimene tidalili kale.
koma chifukwa cha ndalama ya GiveDirectly yatipangitsa kuti tisinthe kumoyo wovutika nkukhala kumoyo woliwo panopa bola. Anthu akwanitsa umbisa ndwela zochuluka komanso anthu akwanitsa kugula njinga za moto.
So what do you think their lives are like 1 month down the line?
Patatha sabata imodzi nakwanitsa tsogolo loko indi anthu zonena kuti mawa ndinkudza uno ndidzakhale tsogolo.
Nakolola zochuluka kupambana ndi mmene zaka zonse ndimakololera mabaki 13.
It's not just about quick wins. This is about building something that lasts, moving from this to this, and from here to here.
Zazikulu tiyesetse tipange nawo ali makoti nkhwani chiyembekezo changa mmene ndili kumunda ndiyembekeza kuti ndikhoza kayipezako 2 million ndipanga zanga maziko nachokera kuti kubunga GiveDirectly.
Ni business imene mapanga ya kantini imene marutsa ndalama zimene zimanithandizira madyedwe apano pakhomo. Ineyo nikhoza nena kuti ndafikapo pothandiza ena m'mudzi muno nakwanitsa kugula marani mitengo nkukhoma nyumbani. Ayi kulibe sogona pothonya ana wanga adzakhala ni chikumbukiro kuti mayi wathu pena kholo lathu linatipangira izi. Ine ya GiveDirectly ngakhale ndikachilosemera nkono kuti nayiwala.
A year later, it's clear cash aid is not a one-time boost. It's a game changer. And no one did it for them. They did it all themselves. Does giving
Great.
people
That gives you a glimpse of. All right. Fantastic. That gives you a glimpse of some of the positive impacts we've been seeing with the recipients that we work with, the recipients of the cash transfers. As Tom had earlier alluded to, we implement different types of programs. The large lump sum cash transfer design is one. We also have a UBI model of flow payments, and we've done this in Malawi, working with Médecins Sans Frontières. We have a Cash for Health program that reaches cervical cancer patients. We also have a program that we're implementing with Save the Children, which is a Cash for Nutrition program, reaching pregnant and lactating women with cash transfers over a period of 30 months. But just wanted to highlight for you one particular aspect, which is very sort of prominent and relevant for our context, which is our Cash for Climate portfolio. Malawi is a bit of a climate hotspot in that we are increasingly having to face natural disasters and shocks. And this is a country that is highly reliant on rain-fed agriculture for livelihoods and for its economy. So these occurrent disasters are basically contributing to reduced resilience for the overall population and increasingly low productivity for the majority of people in the country. In terms of how we consider the sort of Cash for Climate work, it falls in these 3 buckets, where you have the Cash for Climate adaptation, which is more focused on supporting resilience building, providing these large lump sum cash transfers, which support recipients to enhance their assets invest in economic opportunities, and so forth. And then you have the cash for climate disaster preparedness, which is something we've done in countries like Nigeria, where we identify communities that live in natural hazard hotspots that are prone to a particular disaster. And then using weather and other data to predict disasters, we are able to deliver cash before an anticipated disaster. And this is something that we did in countries such as Nigeria. Then we have a portfolio that is under the bracket of loss and damage, cash for loss and damage. And I'm very happy to say that Malawi was one of the first countries within GD to implement this, and perhaps one of the few across the world, if not the first, working with the Scottish government to deliver cash for loss and damage directly to people affected by climate change related loss and damage. Here we reached people in the southern part of the country that had been displaced by cyclone and provided them with large lump sum cash transfers. And maybe just to hone in a bit on this particular work, next slide, please. We are currently implementing a program with FCDO where we, again, a similar model delivering large lump sum cash transfers of $550 to people living in the southern region of Malawi in Chikwawa district. It's an area that's prone to disasters, currently facing a very acute lean season. Actually, I was down there last week, and the price of maize has really, really gone up, far much higher than many other areas in the country. So here we identify areas that are facing a particularly acute lean season and are prone to disasters, and we are delivering the large lump sum cash transfers. We are hoping to reach about 7,200 recipients in this area. We started the work last year and have launched another phase of recruitment right now. And we're looking to achieve outcomes in food security and improved agricultural productivity. And we're also doing some M&D to track resilience building, also looking to work with an external firm that can evaluate our work. And next slide, please. We then have the loss and damage program that we implemented with support from the Scottish government. Here we delivered, again, large lump sum cash transfers of around $766 to households that were affected by Tropical Cyclone Freddy. We reached about 2,646 households in this program. These were households that, as I mentioned before, they were displaced by Tropical Cyclone Freddy. The areas that they live in were classified as unsafe to live in by government, and they had decided as a community to move from these areas to safer land and had identified land. So we came in and provided them with the support that would help them to rebuild and restart their lives. And so far, we've seen quite a lot of positive impacts. Next slide. We closed the project in July of last year, and we ran an evaluation to see what were some of the outcomes of the program. And we saw with this program, 96% of recipients reporting having spent on productive assets. So they were able to build a home, they were able to purchase livestock, they were able to start a new business and invest in education. And this comprised about 66% of their overall spending on the cash transfer. We also saw a 31% increase in the average income or household income between baseline and endline, and saw a really remarkable increase in terms of consumption or food security, 235% increase in average on consumption. Also saw about 7.7 percentage point increase in the proportion of houses with iron sheets as the main roofing material, which is actually quite important in this particular context. Speaks to people moving away from temporary or unsafe housing structures to something that's more permanent and has more sustainable building materials. And then also saw a 29.7 percentage point decrease in people reporting that they had gone hungry in the past week. Next slide, please. Just to close off with a story from a recipient of the cash in this particular program. Just someone who, Saidi here, who is testifying to how his life got transformed after the cash transfers, everything completely damaged, and really just that sense of hopelessness. And moving from that to the point where they had received the cash transfer and they felt like they were now able to rebuild their lives. You can see in the picture there the home that he's managed to build, the bicycle that he has, and some of the household items, which sometimes is difficult to speak to. You never know, like with the different contexts. But when we went there, a lot of people had plastic sheeting that they were using as a shelter. And so it was quite remarkable for us to then move from that to be able to see such structures being put up. Great. Let me stop there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Tom and Yvonne, for your presentation. As I'm sure there's lots of questions from those people in attendance now. If you do have a question, please just raise your digital hand and invite you to ask your question directly, or put any questions in the chat box as well. As I've said before, I was a primary school teacher, so I'm good at pausing and giving wait time. This may have been covered, but I will kick off with one. I'm sure many people are interested where GiveDirectly's funding comes from. Where do you get the cash to be able to give it out? Who are your major partners on the funding side?
Yeah, I'll field that question. So we first of all partner with institutions. So USAID and the US government were our biggest institutional partner. They obviously aren't anymore. But we also partner with the UK government, the EU, UN bodies. We also have great partnerships with foundations, high net worth individuals, and also the general public. Particularly in the US, we have a really big donor base who are really inspired by particularly the effective altruism movement, which is a movement that's mostly US based, but is around the world, trying to find development and humanitarian organizations that deliver on cost effectiveness measures, mainly in terms of how far does your $1 go to tackle poverty. We consistently come up as one of the most effective organizations for that measure, and that's a big motivator for our individual donor base. So yeah, hopefully that gives you an idea of the kind of mix. The percentages I used to know, but now the USAID doesn't really fund meaningfully. Those numbers will have changed, but yeah, really fortunate to have a wide, varied donor base.
Thanks, Tom. Kevin Simpson's online with us, one of the S&P trustees. Question, Kevin?
Hi, Tom. Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, my question's really around, right at the very beginning, you said that your organization believed that giving cash payments was the best way, which presumably means better than all the others, which is really of interest to me because, I'm with a small organization called Malawi Fruits. We're always looking for the best way. We're not particularly precious about anything we do, but just looking for the best way. We tried cash payments about 10 years ago and concluded it wasn't the best way. It was a good way, but not the absolute best. So I think my question is around how you make that claim, really. I think we've all seen it's not just Donald Trump who's seen the waste that's around in the international development sector. I think we've all seen that. Any of us who work on the ground in Malawi, we see the waste. We see, the local expression is the money getting eaten in the process. So it's very easy to say lots of better ways, but I'm just wondering about that claim to be the best.
It's a good question, Kevin. And we're deliberately bolshy about the language. And I personally do think it's the best single intervention that you can do. Though I will caveat that cash is not necessarily the best in any single one case, but it's the best as a single intervention. In terms of how we can say that confidently, I can direct you all to an area on our website where there's a lot of research papers done independently, and particularly benchmarking cash against other interventions. So having a group receiving cash and then having another group receiving a good, say, food or health intervention, and that pretty consistently over a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year period, the cash group will have better outcomes, not only in the area of the intervention, but also more broadly. But yeah, that evidence base is something that we're looking to try and achieve all the time. We use a lot of random control trials. We really think very carefully at design phase with projects about the amount of cash and how people receive it, because we find that that's really important and can affect outcomes quite considerably. We talked a lot in this presentation about the lump sum model, and giving someone $1,000 is a lot more meaningful than just giving them a smaller amount of cash, because of the investment that they can do with that cash and then the wider economic benefit that they can then gain from it. So it is more nuanced than just cash is best. And sometimes I can just slip into that language, and I can kind of apologize for that. But we do work really hard to really hone what cash when, basically, and benchmark it against other interventions. And that was actually work that we were also doing with the US government as well. It's benchmarking cash against other interventions. So it's quite a long-winded answer, Kevin, and I'm not sure I completely answered your question, but I could direct you to evidence papers, and just to say that it is something that's at front of mind for us all the time. We don't just say it for the sake of it.
Thanks.
Sorry, I was muted, of course. Diana, you had a question in the chat box. Are you still with us? Are you able to articulate yourself, or would you like me to read it out? I don't know if you guys can see it. Oh, Yvonne's disappeared and come back again. Here we go. Are there any skills building or capacity programs for the recipients? I'm assuming that might be related to financial management, giving a lot of cash that they may not have before. I think you've kind of addressed, but how do you measure the impact monitor, since monies are unconditional, which I think has been addressed a bit. But yeah, the skills building, obviously some and some of the videos and stuff, small businesses and so forth. Are that other partners or anything that GiveDirectly deal with?
Yvonne, do you want to take that question, or shall I go ahead?
Hello. Sorry, I'm trying to switch between devices. My apologies. Yeah, I can start and you can come in, Tom. And sorry, I'll also go back to the previous question and just, we do acknowledge that cash is not like the silver bullet that will address all challenges in the poverty context. I think for me, a learning from implementing within Malawi, the design of the program is what we found to be quite impactful and meaningful. Sorry, can you hear an echo? Okay. Can you hear an echo still?
We can hear the lovely birds.
I'm so sorry. Today has really been a bad day for internet connectivity. But yes, just to acknowledge, and what has been useful, I think, in our context, we found is the design. So the amount that we're giving, the unconditionality of the cash transfer, and how that enables agency and dignity. And we've just seen remarkable results in how people decide to use the cash transfers. But we do acknowledge some of the limitations, which comes to the next question in terms of capacity building. On our end, we offer basic sort of financial literacy for recipients. We deliver cash through mobile money, and a lot of the recipients will be receiving a phone for the very first time through their interaction with us as GiveDirectly. So we offer basic financial literacy that helps them to navigate that digital platform of using mobile money, and just making them aware of different scams and ways that people can try to defraud them of their cash transfers. So that's something that we do. We have worked with other partners on Cash Plus programs, and for instance, we implemented a program in Vadalia district in the southern region with Self-Help Africa, and they were able to offer. But just to emphasize that even with these particular models or designs, we go in as separate entities, and we don't identify ourselves as particularly linked to a particular organization to maintain the unconditionality of the cash. So that's something we're really particular about, the unconditionality, even in circumstances where we are collaboratively working with other organizations that offer capacity building. We are currently exploring through the large lump sum program that I highlighted, the flagship model. Are there certain interventions that might actually be useful in enhancing the impact of the cash? So we've piloted what we're calling an ideas catalog, where we offer for recipients examples of how past recipients had used the cash and what was helpful to them. And we're adding components in terms of where they can get additional resources. Our initial evaluation of that shows that recipients tended to spend the money how they had originally planned, and they were not necessarily using this planning tool. So we are trying to go into another phase of testing to really try and understand how can that be useful, how can that capacity building tool be useful to them, and what more can we do. And we're exploring partnerships with other researchers that are helping us to dig and think into things like planning fallacies, how people are more optimistic than they should be about maybe what their prospects will be 6 or 7 months down the line, and how can we support them to be able to plan and use the cash transfers better.
Thanks so much. Mick, you had a couple of questions there, you said?
Yeah, thank you very much. So first of all, I'm a huge fan of this. Always have been, read a lot about it. And I think what you're doing is absolutely phenomenal. Totally bought into all of the research materials that you've produced, and so many meetings about this. I've got two questions for you. I remember back at the end of 2022, there was like discussions at a national level with Malawi government about doing a national level trial. The plan there was to commit about $1 billion of GiveDirectly funding to try and raise, I think it was like 3 million people out of poverty. It just kind of seemed to run into the sand at that point in time. I don't know, just where did that project get to? Because there was talk that you were going to either do it there or in Rwanda, and it was never clear to me kind of what happened at the end of that.
Yes, I can start. So that is the flagship program that I highlighted like as the first sort of spotlight, our large lump sum transfer project, which we're implementing in the southern region of Malawi. We started this at what I would call a pilot level in the central region of the country, in Lilongwe Rural, Tie Kongoni, and there we saturated an entire sub-district. So we have, in Malawi, you have the country divided into regions and then districts and then sub-districts that are called tiers. We saturated one of those tiers and have reached about 72,000 recipients closing out last year. And we've now moved to doing this at a district level, which is the 174,000 people that we hope to reach in Shirazulu district. And our hope is to really build on that and raise more money for this model to be able to go to additional districts within the country. So Malawi is definitely implementing this particular program, Rwanda to some extent. But yeah, we're hoping to build momentum around this model and get more actors involved to be able to scale up across the country.
Great. Okay. My second question is around the exchange rate that you're using and how you're actually moving the money. So, you know, obviously Malawian currency is really, really unstable at the moment. And if you're moving $1 into somebody's kind of bank account at the kind of current bank exchange rates, then you know it's probably worth maybe 1,700 kwacha per dollar. What I'm seeing on the money markets at the moment is certainly, you know, a pound is now worth 5,300 kwacha. I just want to make sure that you're kind of making best value out of the hard dollars that you're bringing into the country through that transaction, so that the recipients are actually getting the right amounts of cash that they potentially could be getting. Because I imagine that they could be getting maybe 4,600 to the dollar.
Yes, that is quite a challenge at the moment. We do adhere to the government, like the official exchange rate, because like what you alluded to, we do have these sort of unofficial exchange rates happening on the black market at the moment. We're facing high levels of inflation, and we've been monitoring this official exchange rate, which is about 1,700 Malawi kwacha to a dollar, and that's the rate that we use. What we are trying to do is really convert the money at the point that is needed, rather than perhaps far much in advance before we're actually delivering the cash to the recipients. What helps with this is the fact that, of course, the cash is delivered directly from sort of our headquarters, our bank accounts there, to the wallets of recipients, and we convert at the time that is needed. But we're also looking to revise payment configurations as we go along, tracking how inflation is playing out in the economy. But it is quite a challenge, to be honest. With the Scottish Government project that I talked about earlier, we had just launched the project, and the currency devalued by 40% in November. So at that point is why you see we have a very odd figure, like $766. We basically made calculations to adjust for inflation to maintain the buying power of recipients. That is how we ended up with something of a bit of an odd figure, but that was based on calculations to maintain the buying power of the recipients.
Okay, so just a little pushback on that. As far as I'm aware, the you know, the forex bureaus that we're using, they are regulated, and you know, they're not breaking the law. They're just offering double the rate that you're getting. So it's maybe, you know, for as far as I totally appreciate it's difficult because you're at scale, but you know, there's a big opportunity there for the recipients.
There is, for sure, and our finance team can obviously speak to it better, but we have had conversations at some point last year with various financial institutions on negotiating the exchange rate. But because we're working through the banking system, we do have limitations on which exchange rates we can use, and we are not able to use the foreign exchange bureaus, for instance, inside the country. So this is where we face certain limitations that mean that we have to adhere to the government rates and the bank rates, which tend to be lower than the foreign exchange bureaus in country and the black market.
Sure. I mean, it's a conversation I'm happy to take offline with you, but honestly, I think that there's a way that we could help you double your money here.
Thanks, Mick. In the essence of time, if I can try to combine two questions there that basically touch on the social impacts, particularly, I guess, the negative social impacts. There was a comment about potential drug abuse or other type, I imagine alcohol abuse as well, that might be a cause of this, and other social things you may have noticed being research-based. I know when Stuart Brown and myself, like we mentioned before the meeting, had a meeting in the Lilongwe, those are the questions I had in terms of how it affects a community. I think it's fantastic. It's saturated, but I'm sure the communities themselves probably feel that there's members of that community that, you know, may not benefit the way everyone else does from that money. But in the light of yeah, anything you've noticed on that, or is that also once again working with other partners to address maybe those social ills that are a side effect?
Yvonne could maybe speak more to the specifics of this question in terms of what kind of unintended consequences we see, but I can talk about it maybe just from more of a like thought process design perspective, is that overall in the aggregate, we are pretty confident that you'll get way more positive outcomes than negative. And I think an element of our role is to not place value judgments on how people spend their own money. We're not coming in to tell people how to spend money. And I think that's pretty clear across the way we communicate and how we consider our work internally. You know, we're always recipients first. Ultimately, they're in control of how they spend their money. And we really don't want this to be a value-based, you know, loads of strings attached in terms of how people spend their money. Ultimately, they need to be in charge of how they're spending their own money. So just to really emphasize that point, it doesn't answer the question, but like we will accept that there will be, in some cases, negative circumstances to that, because we think overall in the aggregate, that is the right thing to do, but also the most impactful thing to do. So just to make that clear. And in terms of like maybe unintended consequences, I do think that Yvonne is better placed to answer that. So I'll just quickly say that often, particularly institutional donors that will talk to governments, do have very specific outcomes that they want to meet. So for example, food security. And they will then be frustrated when people, for example, spend money on like building a new roof, because from their perspective, that's not food security. You know, they want to see crops grown, they want to see food bought. Anyone that thinks about that for more than a few minutes, even a few seconds, will realize that having a roof is helpful for food security. It's not a direct food security outcome, but if you have a roof, you can store food. You know, we can't stop rain. And so sometimes the unintended consequences of our work are people just thinking about things more holistically. So it's not necessarily a food security outcome. We can't say building a roof increases people's food security in the short term, but in the long term, it obviously will. So I've kind of not quite answered the question, but hopefully it gives you an idea of like quite often the unintended consequences are there for a specific reason. Yvonne, can I maybe just hand over to you in terms of talking about that, maybe a little bit more specifically with what you see in Malawi?
Yeah, sure. Maybe just to start by saying some of what we've seen in Malawi in terms of sort of unintended negative social impacts. We do have cases where you would walk into a village and someone would say, I did not receive the cash. So we start a program in a particular area and aim to reach everyone, but then you might then have people calling other people back to the village or calling someone that is a relative living in another district back to the village. And unfortunately, we cannot include those people in the program because, as you can imagine, it can get quite out of hand and you would not really have a stopping point to say who is eligible and who is not. So we typically, our eligibility criteria is people who are residents and have lived there for a specified period of time and above that. So those are some of the negative consequences where you'll have people that might then feel that they've been left out of the program due to reasons such as those. And it's something that we're trying to really hone in terms of how can we improve our systems and we get data sources that are more or less reliable for us to be able to build on and be able to target more effectively and get everyone on board that should be gotten on board in the program. But in general, just speak to the impacts that we're seeing. For instance, with the large lump sum program where we saturated a sub-district, you had 90% increase in people sort of moving out of poverty, living on more than $2.15 a day. But you do have a certain group of people that might be more vulnerable. So I will speak to the elderly, how they might spend the cash transfer might be different from someone who has more productive capacity, is younger, and has certain access to information. So I'll just give an example of what I've seen in the village, where we had one grandma whose focus is more on I should have food and I should have a home to live in. And that is how she's spending her transfer. The environment that she's operating in, she's coming from a cultural context of when I'm hiring people for labor, because she doesn't have labor capacity to farm my fields, she's paying them in maize. So she's depleting her granaries. So already that's a group that's particularly more vulnerable. And what we try to do is for recipients that are classified as vulnerable, i.e. they're elderly or they're a person living with a specific disability, or they have a particular challenge, we assign our internal audit team, and it's a safeguarding team that's firewalled from the rest of the team, and they follow up specifically on these individuals to monitor and see that they're not facing sort of heightened risk and heightened adverse impacts from the cash transfer program operating in their areas. And we try to offer support to them in the ways that we can. Yeah, but I would just quickly add that one lesson for me is also that depending on the sort of intended outcomes, so there was a question about thinking about doing this, if your objectives of the program are focused on a specific group of people that perhaps the elderly or people with chronic illnesses, as we've done with MSF on the Cash for Health program, you may want to consider something of a flow design in the cash transfer program. So support that runs perhaps for up to a year in monthly transfers that helps to smoothen out the consumption needs of that bracket of recipients. So sometimes we've done a combination of this for these particular sets of or categories of recipients, where we have lump sum combined with flow, and it addresses the unique needs of certain groups of recipients.
Thank you very much for that, Yvonne. I'm going to invite Stuart Brown to share a few reflections from the meeting. The SNP's CEO, please. Stuart.
Thank you, Chad, and thanks so much, Tom and Yvonne, for a really fascinating and encouraging set of presentations. The principles of independence and dignity which these unconditional cash transfers offer really resonates with the values and the principles of the Scotland-Malawi partnership. For people living in poverty to be able to use cash to tackle multiple issues at once, as Tom has shared, in a way that's flexible, that's scalable and sustainable, is just brilliant. We heard that GiveDirectly's cash transfers increase school enrolment and retention, food security, women's economic empowerment, assets and income and business ownership, and decrease child mortality, domestic violence, skipped meals, illness and depression, and alcohol and drug consumption. Yvonne shared the amazing statistic that over 199,000 people in Malawi have been party to an incredible $95 million since 2019. And the evaluation of one of the programs finding that 96% of the assets had been, 96% of the unconditional cash transfers had been spent on valuable assets, increasing household incomes by 31%. In the video, we heard from some of the citizens themselves speaking about the impact for them of their lives being turned around, and one saying that it's not just quick wins, but it's building something that lasts, that key sustainability issue. Yvonne told us a little about some of the amazing partnerships going on, including the programme Cash for Climate, with contributions from the Scottish Government, who've been in the vanguard of climate crisis, loss and damage. Tom has shared his email address in chat, and so there's an opportunity for ongoing dialogue there, including on currency exchange rates. But for now, Tom, Yvonne, thank you very much indeed for that brilliant and fascinating update. And thank you to all of you for joining us. A video, as Nasim said at the beginning of this event, and all of the exchanges and the chat function are going to be shared on our website after this event. But for now, thank you very much for joining us. That's the end of the meeting. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.